This is recording identification. I'm David Hedberg from Portland State University. Today is March 3rd, 2012. I'm at the home of Lee and Barbara Mason, and we'll be doing an oral history interview for the Silicon Forest project from Washington County. Lee, could you tell me your date of birth and your place of birth, please?
January 5th, 1929, Elrose, Saskatchewan, Canada.
Excellent, thank you. Could you tell me about how you came to the Pacific Northwest?
Well, yes, it's fairly involved. How many minutes do I have?
Well, you can have as much as you want.
Okay, well, came from a very fortunate family. My dad was the telegraph operator for the Canadian National Railroad. So we lived in the railroad station right beside the tracks. And I was born just before the Depression hit. So we were living there all through the Depression in this station house that furnished us with everything: coal, water, ice, electricity, and maybe some other things that I can't think of right now. So my dad taught me how to be a telegraph operator, so I learned how to do that when I was about 10. And then when we left Elrose and lived in 2 or 3 different towns in Saskatchewan. And then when I'll back up a little bit. In 1943, it's at the height of World War II, my brother Glenn and I came to Portland to work in the shipyards for the summer. That was between about grade 7 and grade 8, I think, for 2 months in the summer. And we were making about $1 an hour, and even adults in Saskatchewan, if they had it, well, they were having work then because the war had started. They were probably making 25 cents an hour. So we worked all summer and saved our money. So we went back and we got involved with a little band and stuff, bought our own instruments and everything. So then we lived in 3 towns: Hanley, Saskatchewan, Punachai, Saskatchewan, and Nokomis, Saskatchewan, where we learned to ski, and we had a band in a couple of towns. We played hockey and we iced curling. I don't know if you're familiar with curling or not. It's done right here in Portland now. So then, getting a little bit farther ahead, between grade 11 and grade 12, when I was 17, I came down to Portland again, went up to the big station in Portland, Union Station. I'm sure you know where it is. And I took the elevator up to floor 2, where the dispatching offices were for the Southern Pacific Railroad. And I was in there and applying for a job. So I was treated so well. A fellow all in a suit and everything brought me in, and in about 10 minutes interview, he took me into where the guys were telegraphing and gave me a little test, and that was very easy for me, and asked me about some of the rules on the railroad, how to keep trains from crashing and all this and that. Well, the rules are a little different in Canada than in the States, but very similar. So he said, well, I'm going to send you to Woodburn, Oregon to learn our way, the Southern Pacific way. So, and that was such a nice little town, man. That was 1946. 1946. So the funny thing about that, there was an agent there, and a day operator. Normally in smaller towns, you just have the agent that does the telegraphing and selling tickets and express and freight and all that. But it was fairly busy, so they had an operator there. So the agent introduced me to the operator, and he had a unique name. Do you remember what it was, Barbara?
Oh, I don't, sorry.
Oscar, it was Oscar, well, I'll think of it in a minute. Anyway, I said, Oscar Frazee, F-R-O-E-S-E. So I said, well, you know where I come from, in Hanley, Saskatchewan, there was some Frazees there, although I pronounced it Frozy, because that's the way we pronounced it up there. Oh, he said, that's where my relatives are from. So anyway, he had a car, and so he drove me around. We played tennis and introduced me to people that I should know. And I didn't have any money. I had $5 with me, but he found me a place to get room and board. And very nice lady. I think I could still find the house in Woodburn. It was right beside the tennis court. And so the first day I went in, there was a cafe right across the street from the station. The station is no longer there, but you can see where it was by the sidings and so on. So anyway, I went in to have something to eat, and I only had $5. So I looked at the menu, and they had sandwiches for 25 cents, but they had a hot beef sandwich, and I'd never heard of it before. Sounded real good, and I had to think about it for a while because it was 45 cents. I don't remember if that included coffee or not. But anyway, I ordered that, and it was very good. And so I was, being as I worked for my dad so much, I quickly learned. So in about 4 days, they got a call from chief dispatcher in Portland, and said, we need an agent at, I'm trying to think of where it was, Toledo, Oregon. Actually, he said, we need an operator at Toledo, Oregon. I was both an operator and agent. So he put me on a bus. I was only there for 4 days learning the business. And I went to Toledo and stayed in the hotel there, and a man came to visit me. The agent in Toledo came to visit me. He was a man about 45. Seemed a little old at the time to me. And since then I've wondered about him because he met me, very nice, but he saw this skinny little kid, 115 pounds, soaking wet, 115 pounds, and he was going to turn the station over to me to run the next day. But not really, because it was a little bigger station. There was a chief clerk there and another operator. Well, as it worked out, the operator would be the agent and I would be the operator. But I had to get up real early in the morning and open the place up about 6 o'clock in the morning. It was about a block away. Am I going on too long here?
No, not at all.
So, anyway, I went down there, and they had found me a place to stay near the high school. And, I sat down in the telegraph office. I'm the first one there, nobody around. So I knew I had to telegraph, and the lines from, I think they came from Eugene, the telegraph lines, to Toledo. And there was trees overhanging them, so when they were telegraphing, you'd sometimes miss the dots. You just had to guess, well, was that 2 dots and a dash, or was that 1 dot? But I had some pretty good foresight. We had to copy these train orders that told the trains where to meet. So if you made a mistake, you could actually run those trains together. There was no signals like there are nowadays. They just went by these train orders that we hooped up. You're probably familiar with that area. And so anyway, I had the foresight to go through some previous train orders and see what the names of the towns were, because they would say a certain train would meet another certain train at Myrtle Creek or something like that. So you had to know how to spell it. If you knew that, and then you're reading the telegram, and it starts out with M-Y, oh, you pretty well know it's Myrtle Creek, even though they missed the odd letter going along. So that was very helpful. I didn't make any mistakes. Never crashed any trains. So anyway, I was there for 2 weeks relieving the operator, who was relieving the agent. And then the operator was going on his vacation for 2 weeks. So I was there for a month. And then they were sending me to, on the main line, south of Eugene, to a place called Wicopee, W-I-C-O-P-E-E. It was just a place where they had a passing track and a few shacks where the operators lived and where the section foreman would live. So the agent at Toledo was very nice. They provided us a large trunk full of dishes and everything, because there was no cafes or anything. There was nobody lived in the town except the railroad people. No town there, maybe about 15 people maximum. So he told me all the stuff I should get, canned stuff and so on, so forth. So when I got there, I was totally exhausted. And they stopped the train to let me off. The trains would never stop there. They stopped the train to let me off. And I introduced myself to the afternoon operator, who was a lady. They had a fair number of lady operators during the war, which I'd never met before. Up in Canada, we had no lady operators. And she was very nice. But I mentioned the hoops that you have to hand up to the engines. And in most places, you have these wooden hoops that are shaped like that. I can draw one for you later on, about this size. And when you get these train orders, you clip them on like a little, what kind of a clip? The wooden clip, you know, that you use.
Like a clothespin. Yeah.
Clothespin, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Clothespin. So when the train goes by, you hand up one of these hoops up to the engine and one to the conductor. But this town, Wicopee, was on the highest grade of any railroad, I believe, in the United States. It was about a 2.5 grade, just remembering it. And most the railroads do not want to exceed 2% grade. So this meant that coming out of Oak Ridge, Oregon, they put on helper engines. Now the freight trains would have about 3 extra helper engines on there to pull maybe 50 cars. But the passenger trains, they would put at least 1, sometimes 2 engines on them. So that meant there had to be a lot of train orders handed up. So the way it worked there, you went outside the office, and right beside the track was a tower with a ladder that went up about 8 or 10 feet. So you could put these hoops on an automatic thing that stuck out towards the engine, and one was lower for the conductor. But so I would have to, if a passenger train was coming along, I would have to put up 2 train orders for the engineers and 1 for the conductor. Well, so getting back, I was exhausted so this lady operator showed me this new type of hoop where you had to thread like a binder twine. It was a spring-loaded thing, and you had to thread binder twine through it and attach the train orders to the binder twine. So I just come to work at midnight and took over from this lady, and things were very quiet until 5 minutes to 1. There was a yellow light came on in front of my desk, And so I called the dispatcher in the Eugene. We were on phones there, not telegraph.
Mm-hmm.
I called him and I said, you had to know which trains were coming. You could tell by your schedule. I said, number 11 just hit the yellow light. Oh, he said, well, clear him. And now that means that so I read off about, okay, I said, clear number 11 with orders numbers 6, 8, 10, 12, about 4 or 5 different orders, all had numbers. Mm-hmm. All these train orders on my desk. And he said, wait a minute. I might change the meat. So, okay. So then I'm waiting while he's deciding what to do. And pretty soon I'm looking out the window and I can see the headlight of the train coming less than a mile away. So I said, hey, the number 11, I can see the headlight. Oh, clear him. Okay. So I have to read these train orders out. And he said, okay. And his name, I remember it was A.J. Green. So he said, okay, AJG, and fine. So I turn around and run to these hoops, and they're spring-loaded, and I have a string that I have to put on and put the order in, tighten it up, and I get one done. I got 2 more to do, and the engine goes by. Well, now they can't keep going because they have a red board. Mm-hmm. And they can't go unless I hand up the order. So all of a sudden I hear these 2 engines screeching to a halt, and it was the daylight. It was our fastest train we had, going down to Oakland, actually. All these beautiful yellow cars going by, yellow and orange cars. And by the time the last car got just in front of my station, they got stopped. Well, by then I had all the train orders put together, and I ran out and ran way up. There was a little gravel path, fortunately, right beside the track. So I ran up to the first engine, the engineer, which would be the helper engine because they just put him on the front, and handed him up this train order, and he took it. And I thought he was going to chew me out. Didn't say a word. Then I came back to the regular engineer with on this real nice, beautiful, or the engine is the one that's important now.
Oh, okay.
4440. Mm-hmm. I have millions of pictures of it. And I handed it up to him, never said a word, probably thanks. And then I ran back to the conductor and handed him in, never said a critical word. And then, because it's on this steep grade, both engines. And then away they go. So I come in and said to the dispatcher, number 11 arrived at 1 o'clock and left at 1:02. What did you stop him for? Well, I didn't have time. You remember? You didn't clear him till I could see the lights of the engine. Okay. He was kind of mad. And I said to myself, I haven't heard the end of this. So the night went all through, no problems. Lots of trains going left and right. And no problems now that I had the dispatcher cleared these trains as soon as I told him to hit the yellow light. So no problem. But 8 o'clock when I'm getting off and turning everything over to the day operator, there was a side phone that just rang and said, this is Vern Field, the chief dispatcher in Eugene. What did you stop number 11 for last night? So I went through the little scenario, and he was still mad. He thought it was my fault. And, it wasn't my fault at all. I was quick to admit if I ever made an error. So he said, well, okay, but don't let it happen again. And so these fellows were all worried because anytime you stopped a streamliner, they had to send a report right to the general manager, the superintendent, the high mucky mucks of the Southern Pacific Railroad, which would be ridiculous because he would have made that time up in about a half an hour. He would have been on time again, but he had to do that. So that's what brought me down to Oregon. I guess that was
Excellent.
your question.
Yeah.
So that was my first time in Oregon. No, that was my second time. I'd come down for the shipyards, and then I came down for this job. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up with you about working in the shipyards.
Oh, good.
You know, it sounds like you were quite young when you came down.
Well, actually, when I came in '43, I was too young to work in the shipyards. But my brother Glenn, he was a couple of years older than me, and you had to be 16 to work in the shipyards. And so he got on the shipyards, and I went out and picked berries. I have some stories about that. But that's so on the shipyards. Then the next year when I came out, I hired out, and that's when I made the $1 an hour. And because I didn't make that much picking berries for sure. So I was a burner. Now, burner, you learn to be a burner before you become a welder. Maybe you're familiar with burning or not.
No, welding, but not
well,
burning.
being as I was, this was so interesting about the shipyards. In Portland, this was 45, I guess. Yeah, I maybe made a year error there, but it doesn't matter. So it was in 45 when I was working for them, and so they hired me out. You just had to sign up, hire you out, we'll find something for you to do. So they hired me as a burner, and I went on graveyard shift and met this old foreman that was probably 50 years old, real nice guy. And he said, well, this fellow will show you how to be a burner. So he took me out and handed me this, looks exactly like a welding torch. I think it's probably the same thing. But you don't weld, it's just got this hot flame coming out, and you can adjust it to get it just right. Well, I was pretty handy, so I learned right away. So I had about a 5-minute instruction how to be a burner. So then they said that when you begin, these ships had double bottoms. Double bottoms started after that famous ship went down. What was the big one that they made the movie about?
Oh yeah, I can't think of the name, but
You know the name of it.
the Titanic.
The Titanic.
Oh, all right.
Apparently it wasn't, if I got the story right, it wasn't double bottomed. So after that, I think even I think there was a sister ship to the Titanic, and I think they took it back in and put double bottoms on it, but I might be wrong on that. So the double bottoms, there's the original bottom, and then about we'd say maybe 2.5 feet below is another bottom, with this airspace between it. But they had crossbars, like they were steel, about a 1/2 inch steel by 2 inches by maybe 3.5 feet long, that they used when they welded all this stuff together. But they didn't want the weight in there, so my job was to go down there and cut these things out, and I just left them on. Somebody else would come and pull these bars out later. But most people that did welding and burning had leather pants. Well, I was just a kid. I didn't have any money to buy leather pants, so I just had my own pants. So about every 20 minutes, I'd smell smoke and see my pants were on fire, so I just, with my hand, knocked the fire out and kept going. So I was there for almost 2 months and earned some money and went home. And it was a wonderful job. In fact, what they did, they were so good, about maybe the latter part of July is when Japan surrendered. But they still kept building the ships because you can't just shut things off. So most people, the older, they wanted to quit and go and find a job somewhere else. And they knew that us younger guys, they wanted a few bucks, which was big money to us. So they kept us on right till the end of July when we had to go back to school. So I thought that was pretty nice of them. And
How many ships a day were they making?
well, at the end, we were launching a ship a day, I think. We were building 12 ships at once. They were called ways. You've seen them on TV where they lowered the boats. So you just start with these big 12 by 12s or whatever it is going into the water. And then you see that the ship is partially built up with the double the double hulls sitting on them. Most of the stuff was prefabricated, and they'd move this double hull onto the ways. And then the next one was half built up, and the next one was 2/3 built up. And when you got to the 12th one, it was launched. And then, of course, they'd start building there with a new one, and so on. So we just kept rotating around. But we started out building, when I went there in July 1st of 45, we were building Liberty ships.
Mm-hmm.
But they switched over to Victory ships. And at the last of the war there, we were launching a ship a day.
Wow.
They got, Henry Kaiser was the fellow that started the ships.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it might be interesting. My first cousin, Win Clark, and his wife, Onley Clark, were the two first aid people there. Win Clark was a doctor, and his wife Onley was a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
That is all the doctors and nurses they had.
Really?
I imagine there was 10,000 or more
Wow.
people there.
Well, that was
Clock
the beginning
around.
of Kaiser
Yeah,
Permanente.
right.
So then, this was Henry Kaiser
Uh-huh.
that owned the shipyards. He had them all across the country. And his wife, I believe that it's called Kaiser Permanente, because I believe his wife's maiden name was Permanente.
Oh.
So it's called Kaiser Permanente Hospital now.
Mm-hmm.
So at first, he wanted to start this, his wife wanted to start this hospital. And the doctors were all resistant of it because that's socialized medicine. And they resisted it, but he kept going on it. And after a few years, the doctors just loved it because now they don't have to take care of any paperwork. They don't have to hire nurses and secretaries. They just have to go and be a doctor. So we're still with Kaiser and very happy with it, although it's getting way too expensive. They've, in the last few years, they've hired chief executive officers, and the first thing they do is surround themselves with more people and more money, and there's so much money going out for administration. Henry Kaiser would just roll over in his grave because he was an efficient guy. He put lots of people on a job, but they had to be efficient. No extra people. Anyway, that's a little bit about the shipyards.
Yeah.
Was that enough?
What were you working on VJ Day?
I was working on VJ Day, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. Well, I don't know if I was right in the plant on VJ Day. I think I was at home. In fact, was it on a weekend? I don't remember exactly when they announced it on the radio. We didn't have TV then. But anyway, my brother and I and a friend of ours that was down with us, my friend from Elrose, Saskatchewan, he worked for the Safeway during the summer. We went down to Interstate Avenue where the buses run quite regularly from Kenton.
All right. Mm-hmm.
The little town of Kenton, which is still there and very similar to the way it was in 1945, the main street. So I went down there and caught the interstate bus that went into Portland. And there was all kinds of big bands, just like Harry James and it was all across the country. And the Dorsey Brothers, but Portland had several big bands. They were on flatbeds going right down Broadway, playing all these songs. And then you would, what we had in those days, instead of TV, you had newsreels. There was one movie house right down in the heart of Portland that all they showed was movie tone news all day long. And it was updated every day, just like television is now. So, of course, we went to that, and it would show all these sailors and the famous sailor that kissed this girl. You've seen pictures of that on Life magazine. I'm not sure if we saw her, but it was exactly the same in Portland. The streets were full of sailors and soldiers. And getting back to the station, when I applied for that job, the station was full of soldiers because they were going on troop trains and stuff. Totally full of soldiers. And the station, I was just down there a couple of days ago putting my brother on. The station today is exactly the same as it was then, except I went up to the second floor, and now the whole station is owned by the city of Portland. And so they're refurbishing the upper floors, but I see the same door that I went through to be hired out. And there is a communicator up there that works for Amtrak, I guess. I had a little visit with him, but it's nothing like the old days. No telegraphing or anything.
Wow. So after you worked for the Southern Pacific, what did you do afterwards?
Well, I'll finish up how I was. My last job in the Southern Pacific was Clackamas, Oregon. You know, where there's the station is still out in a field about a mile north of where it used to be.
Oh, really?
That they were going to turn into a museum. I doubt that it'll ever happen, but anyway, I was. Now they needed an agent, somebody that a lot of the operators weren't agents. They didn't know how to sell tickets and stuff like that. So we had a supervisor of agents, the nicest guy you ever met. So when I worked at various places, if I ever had a problem, I just call him up. Oh yeah, this is how you do that. Okay, so he took me out to Clackamas and showed me the ropes. There was a lady station agent there that had never learned to telegraph. She went back 40 years, so she couldn't handle these train orders and stuff. She was just more or less selling tickets and stuff. So they were so happy now to have so we could give train orders to these trains going out just as they left Portland. Sometimes they don't get out of Brooklyn Yards is where they start out. Have you heard of Brooklyn Yards? Okay. And that, incidentally, is where that 4440 train is, the engine.
Yeah.
They store it there. So he showed me the ropes of the place, and this very nice lady, I think her house, she just lived a block away. Station is gone, but I think her house is still there. I'm going to drive by one of these days. Anyway, so the next morning I get on way over. By this time, my brother had moved out of Vanport. We first of all went to Vanport.
Okay, yeah. This is part 2 of the interview with Lee Mason. Could you tell me about how you came to work at Tektronix?
Oh, all right. Well, I told you about my last job was at Clackamas, Oregon. Then I had worked for the Southern Pacific for about a year and a half or so. I decided I'd like to go back up to British Columbia, where I had 2 brothers up there. And we had lots of roots up in British Columbia. So I turned in my resignation and hopped on the train, went up to Vancouver, BC. Oh, you want to know about how I got on Tech? And worked there for from 1948 to 1956. Oh, good. So in the spring of '56, the Canadian railroads were a little behind the U.S. railroads as far as dieselizing. When I worked up there, it was all big steam engines, up-to-date oil-burning steam engines, powerful brutes and fast. But so that meant, being as it was steam engines, they didn't pull long trains. A long freight train might be 50 cars. So then in early 1956, the diesel started coming in, which meant the trains could be a mile long, or 100 cars, or even longer. So when I was there was a lot of trains. So in the town I was working in, we had 2 daytime operators. We were so busy. The other guy was an old guy, 65 years old, ready for retirement. And I was what they called a temporary guy, even though I was there for 6 or 7 years. It was a temporary job. So I knew as soon as the diesels came in with the longer trains, they would abolish the temporary job. And being as I only had 8 years seniority, I'd be working out in the sticks again like I was at Wicopee. So I thought, I'll just go down to Portland and get a job, because my brother-in-law had come down 2 years earlier and went to work for Tektronix. And he
Oh.
said there was a lot of work going on down here. So I was young, and I knew if it didn't work out, the railroads were still busy. I could always go back on the railroad. There was 50 railroads in the States that I could have got a job for.
Right.
But I come out in, it would be in April of 1956, and stayed with my brother John in North Portland. Borrowed his car and drove out to where I went was 6900 Southwest Barnes Road, which was the main place for Tektronix, and they had graduated from Hawthorne and moved out there. And now the 6900 building, there's one there now, about a 4-story high building, but the building that I hired into was only 1 story, but it was a nice modern building. So I drove out there, had no trouble finding it, and went into the door. I can still visualize going in there. And there was the most attractive movie star girl at the desk that I'd ever seen. And so friendly, and so I told her I was applying for work. Okay, fill out these forms. And so then she said, okay, well, the way it works, we give you a little test. So Blanche Cook is our personnel person that will do that. So I waited for a few minutes, and Blanche Cook came in, probably a lady, maybe 35 or so. Very professional looking. And she took me into an office where you put square pegs into holes and round pegs, things like that. Well, I was very good at that because I'd been a telegraph operator, so I went right through that, and she remarked at how well I did. And then little IQ tests and stuff. And so everything went swimmingly. And I noticed one thing they did that I don't know. While you were visiting them, they had 3 faces. They had a frown face, and they had a straight face and a smiling face. Just like, what is that? They call that smiley face now. This was way back in 56. Just a circle, no color. So she checked mine as smiling face. That was important.
Oh.
If you were a frowning, that would be a point or 2 against you. Because everybody at Tech was just like your long-lost friend. Such a friendly group of people you'd never met. So anyway, that was fine. Thing went good. So they said, we'll call you. So I was used to going and hiring out and being hired immediately. That was my railroad experience. So I went back to 7155 North Mobile, where my brother lived, and didn't get a call from a day or 2. So a week went by, and we did a few things, And then another week went by, and they never called me. So I noticed that Voigt Rubber, which was down, have you heard of Voigt Rubber?
No.
They're back in those days, they may be in existence now. They made all the basketballs and that kind of balls, and the name Voigt on them. It was like they worked with rubber and leather, footballs, stuff like that. And they're right down on that, what's that commercial street that goes out towards the airport?
McLaughlin?
No, by the tracks. But it doesn't matter.
Oh, Lombard.
They're all, pardon?
Lombard.
No, the one paralleling Lombard. When Lombard runs into that commercial street.
Oh,
It's where all the businesses are. Anyway, only about 4 or 5 blocks from where my brother lived. In Kenton, actually.
Okay.
So I went down there, and it was in a Quonset-type building, and hotter than the hubs of hell. But the office wasn't bad. So he took me back to show them making these balls, and there was rubber fumes and kind of like smoke in the air, and it was a kind of a production line, people making these balls. And so I walked through there and then went in the office and took an application. So I go home, and this was in the morning. So I go home, and about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I get a call from Tektronix that, come on out, we're hiring you. And then about a half an hour, tomorrow, come out, half an hour later, I got a call from Voigt Rubber that they were hiring me. So I said, well, I already have it. I don't know. I'd have been dead now if I'd have stuck with Voight rubber with all the fumes and stuff. So I was so fortunate. So then I went out. I guess I went out to interview for a job. Now they were hiring me, but where to place me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went into CRT, first of all, with Darrell Pennington, a fellow Canadian. He had been a professor at UBC. But I don't think he even knew I was a Canadian unless he recognized my accent. Probably did. But anyway, I went through all the tube area. It was such a fascinating area, but even though I'd done a little burning, so I was a little familiar with torches, I guess I wasn't the fellow that he was particularly looking for. So then they took me over to Erwin Aschenbrenner, who was over the sheet metal department. And my brother-in-law knew Ash, we called him Aschenbrenner. Just died a few months ago. Nicest guy I ever met. Anyway, so he turned me over to a wonderful supervisor. I'll think of his name in a minute. But anyway, so while the supervisor was showing me around, Erwin went to my brother-in-law and said, "Well, what do you think about Lee? Would he fit in with our?" "Oh yeah," he said, "he sure would." Okay. So then the supervisor said, "Yeah, it looked like I'd work out." So they hired me. And it was a very significant day. I didn't know it at the time. It was May the 4th, 1956. And my wife was born 13 years older on
Well, I
May
was
the
born in
4th.
1945. I made
1945. So she would be about 11 years old then, whom I've never met, of course. So, what was the next question then?
Well, you got hired and you went into.
Oh,
Shipyards.
all right.
Mm-hmm.
So then the next day, they took me into the paint shop, and a fellow by the name of Lee Miller, similar name to mine. Here I'm Lee Mason, he's Lee Miller. So every time they were paging Lee Miller, it was kind of noisy. I wasn't sure if it was me or him. I knew why would anybody be paging me. But anyway, my job there was, we got a lot of oscilloscopes back from the military, it seemed like it was, that would get scuffed up somehow. So they would take all the sheet metal, which was considerable, off it, and the paint department would strip the paint and repaint it. And they'd even change colors a little bit to more of a military color. And they'd even upgrade them if they need, every month or two they were finding a way of improving them.
Right.
So they'd update them and ship them out just as new because they were exactly the same as new. And so I was there for a day or two, and then they said they needed somebody to work on scope mobiles. Now, if you've looked in the book, you've seen scope mobiles, have you?
Mm-hmm.
They're the cart that has rails like this, and the scope sits on there. I'm sure you've seen them.
Mm-hmm.
So they needed somebody to work in the scope mobile department assembling. So that was one of my jobs, to take all these parts and screw them together and end up with a finished scope mobile. But not only did we assemble them, I had a wonderful lead man then, Ivan Arnold, terrific guy. And he showed me, right away he could see that I had some potential, I guess. So he showed me everything, and I was operating bending brakes and punching things. Every day he had me sawing something. Every day I was on a new piece of equipment and learning how to read these drawings. And I enjoyed it so much, I couldn't wait to get to work. And I was that way for about the first 25 years of tech, but not the last two.
Mm-hmm.
But so anyway, we were just booming. That's probably why they hired me. I think they were hiring anybody that came through the door. We were just booming. I was very close and possibly exactly the 1,000th employee at Tektronix.
Oh, really?
In that month, the next month, I guess it would be, at the end of the month, they announced how many scopes they'd shipped. And that month, they shipped 1,000 scopes with only 1,000 people.
Wow.
and a lot of them were office people. I don't know how it was done, and the profit share was 40%. But previously they had profit shares up to 70%. But now with so many people taken out of the profit, even though, and the prices were very low, but these scopes, you heard before, were sold pretty much at cost plus. Whatever they cost. That's the way the ships were built by Henry Kaiser. It was all cost plus. So I never worried about getting paid from the government, of course. And most of our stuff went to the government too. Government labs. And so it seemed, if I remember right, I could be wrong on some of these things. It seemed like as they hired more people, then next month it would be 1,100. And then sort of like 1,200. And then it couldn't keep going at that rate, of course. I've forgotten when it maybe tapered off. But after 2 months, we were so busy that Ivan Arnold said, we got to put a swing shift on. So I want you to take about 10 guys and put them on swing shift, a couple of new guys and a couple of these experienced guys, and you'll be the supervisor, called lead man, swing shift lead man. So I did that, went to work at 3:30 then, I think, and had a nice crew. Well, they all were helpful and did their work, and didn't have to read the supervising. You still worked. You didn't just stand around and supervise. So there was no problems. And then a couple of months later, Erwin Aschenbrenner came to me and said, we need this space. So we've just built a new warehouse over by the tracks on, what's that street?
Hawken.
Where you wanted to buy...
Milliken.
Milliken and... Hawken and Milliken. By the tracks there, the Max goes right by this warehouse. The warehouse is still there. So I was the first guy that occupied maybe 10,000 square foot of warehouse with my little group, just in one small section of it. Well, now, instead of building these scope mobiles from scratch, where we made all the parts, pent them all up and formed them, all I was going to do was assemble them. So all I had was 2 other fellows and myself. So, and I had to work just as hard as all 3 of us were building these things. We built, for the 2 years that I did this, every day we built 20 scope mobiles. Every day. There was never a hiccup. There was a man over in building 19, which was that first one I was in. Building 19, Gene Kavanaugh. Make a note of his name. He was the scheduler. And he'd call me up about once a week and say, now, Lee, how are you fixed for the rails? Those rails are these big aluminum things that were the handle. And anything else that you need? No? Well, yeah, we need some more drawers. We need some more felt. Okay. So there was never once in 2 years that those parts weren't in the warehouse for me. When we went on computers, I wasn't in this department. Things would get so screwed up. But he did such a wonderful job of that. So that I remember Erwin Aschenbrenner, after about a year, he called me over and gave me a fabulous raise. In fact, I don't think you should put this on there. But he told me that he gave me the biggest raise he had given anybody under him since he was running the place. It was still probably only 25 cents an hour, but the typical raise was, when you started out, was 5 cents, and then maybe 10 cents. If you're lucky, you'd get 15 cents. So that would be 1957 when I got that 2-bit raise. So then he said, so at about December of 1958, he said, we need some management over in the plastic department on the swing shift. They're expanding greatly. So we're going to have a swing shift there instead of just a day shift. So I'd like you to go over and be manager of that. Actually, not manager, they called us supervisors. Okay, so I went over there and started work, I think, about January 5th, 1959, yeah. It was a good year. So I started out there, and I remember the main man was Duncan Bergeron, a real sharp guy, but sort of a different guy. He was a little higher level manager. He was a unit manager, which is fairly high. And then under him would be a manager, and then under him would be a supervisor like me. But he was a hands-on guy, which at that level you usually weren't hands-on. You wore a suit and maybe a tie and a white shirt, but he liked to dress up. So I'm on swing shift. So he stayed late. So the biggest machine we had was what was called a 4-ounce Maslow injection molding machine. It was quite huge for only being 4 ounces. Now I'm in the molding business now, and a machine that was the same physical size as that Maslow was would be like a 12-ounce machine, because they made them much better. They didn't need them so super heavy. Everything was made so heavy. Anyway, the way he showed me, he took me to the machine and showed me how it worked, about 5 minutes. And it was a tricky job because I had to take these probe cylinders that were about 2 inches long, a 1/2 inch diameter, made out of aluminum. And it was a 6-cavity die, which means I had to have the gate open, little safety concern, and put these on core pins, 6 of them, close the gate, press a button, and then adjust the pressures and stuff, and then it would shoot. Well, the first one, he did one, and then just walked away, went home. So then the way the idea was, I would run this machine when I wasn't busy supervising other people. So, but he told me, just cool it down a little bit, and then you can come back to it. So I cooled it down a little bit and helped some of the people. I had a crew of about 20 people running hand machines and drill presses, and what else did they run? Tapping machines and inserting machines, a lot of tricky jobs. So then after everything seems to be smoothed out there, I go back and raise the heat to get it up to about, it was a nylon, which is a tough material to run, which nobody told me. If it gets moist, it absorbs moisture. So just sitting around waiting for an hour for me to run, the material is in a hopper, but it's an open hopper, and it's going to be absorbing just small amounts of moisture. So I put these 6 inserts in there, closed the gate, and jacked up the pressure a little bit and punched the button. And it was about a 30-second cycle, so after 30 seconds it opens up, and the parts are all there. And I think I might have even, they ejected, but they were still on the sprue. But they all had little silver streaks on them. So, gosh, what's that? Set it aside. I knew it would be because you take the silver streak with your thumb and it would peel off. So I put it on, did a couple of same things. So I turned the heat off and shut it down. The next day, when I came to work, I asked the guy, not Dunk, he was gone, but the regular day foreman. He said, that's moisture in the material. And so if your work is some material, you don't need to worry about moisture. Like the stuff they make milk bottles out of, polyethylene, polypropylene, even ABS, although we dry ABS even though it doesn't need it that much, maybe a little bit. But nylon, you're always drying it. Polycarbonate, you can never get all the moisture out of it. The biggest problem with injection molding is moisture. We still have it in our molding company. Biggest problem. We think we have the state-of-the-art dryers, but it's still once in a while there's moisture. Okay, so I got started with tech there. Now
So
I'm in the.
What happened? What happened? Did you figure out how to keep the moisture out of it?
Well, oh yeah, we had dryers there.
Ah.
But they had dried the material, but just sitting in the hot room. You have to have a lid on it. But these things you learn, you know. So yeah, I found that very interesting too. My goodness sakes, that was interesting. So then we had a man come down from Boeing. The department was getting big, and Duncan Bergeron, good man, but he's a hands-on guy, and I think the upper guys thought, well, they needed and he had worked his way up and learned the business just by doing it. So they figured they needed a professional plastic engineer in there to be the top guy. Mm-hmm. So they brought down Jim Sayre, S-A-R-E, I believe, from Boeing. And a real nice guy. And he wasn't there about a week that he wanted to firm up the quality control. So he made me a unit manager in charge of quality control for plastics. A pretty big step up from about a range 9 to range 12. And gave me a nice raise. He seemed to have a lot of faith in me. And just left me alone to my own resources. So I just hired had promoted a couple of people from the floor to be with me. And I think we did a very effective job. And but then what happened later on? So I was doing that for a year or two as the quality control manager. And then something very significant happened. Oh, we moved into a different part of the building. We were in the south side of the building. We moved over to the north side, much bigger area. Brought in a whole bunch of molding equipment, real nice arbors they were called. Nice, they were about 2-ounce machines, maybe 1.5 ounce, about a dozen of them. And we had lots of different managers, Cal Smith. My favorite manager in the plastic department then, I'm talking about we were married then.
We got married in 1970.
So this would be maybe, oh, no, it was before that. I was thinking John Kennedy came through our plastic department. And so that would be, when he was running for office, what would that be? 1962, wasn't it? So yeah, we were over in this newer part on the north side cut most of that up. In 1962, my office is right where he goes from one office into where the injection molding is. And here comes David Brinkley. There would be a Secret Service guy in front of him, but you wouldn't know it. And then David Brinkley, John Kennedy, and other dignitaries. I think Bill Weber, the vice president of Tech, was with them. And the whole I was standing at the door because we knew he was coming. Went right by me into the injection molding. It was quite a highlight of my career.
Yeah.
So then by that time, I was in quality control then, but then I got switched over. Oh, I know what happened. They consolidated the ceramics quality control with the plastic quality control. So the man that was from ceramics was Howard Lewis. He took over the job, and I was under him then, and plus another guy was under him, and I was on that job for maybe a couple of 3 months or longer, and then I decided to get into pre-production, where when they first started a new plastic part, I would get involved with making sure the die got made on time and scheduling it. I really enjoyed that job. And that's what I did pretty much very similar to that till I retired in 1983. It was a fabulous job.
So when did you go to Vancouver?
We went to Vancouver in about 1981, they decided to build a plastic plant in Vancouver.
yeah.
And so our whole plant went over there. Well, I shouldn't say whole plant. But, by this time plastic was split into two divisions. There was an accessory division, which had probably a couple of hundred employees. But the main division maybe had 400 or 500. That ratio, sort of. So the main plastic division, which was in Building 16 on the main campus, moved over to Vancouver. But we people that were in pre-production engineering and engineering stayed in Beaverton and just communicated, mostly on phone, but
It's all right. No, go ahead.
but mostly we'd do most of our work back and forth. Well, on the phone. But then they decided, I would say, I'm trying to get the dates right. I would say in the spring of '82, the fall of '81. The fall of '81, they said, well, all you guys are going to have to go over there physically. So Barbara and I started looking around right away for a house and found one. A real nice house, about 4 or 5 miles from work. And we went to work I was there, didn't like it at all. They changed management, and the management, I don't know if you want to quote me on this, they brought in a lot of college people that had never had anything to do with running a plastic company. Most of them hadn't even got their hands dirty. And my favorite line was that they went to college and learned all the lines, but they didn't learn what was between the lines, which is where it all is. Everything's between the lines. So it was a very unpleasant place because they were asking us to do things that were totally ridiculous so that we couldn't do our job. In fact, in those days we had terminals. We didn't have these desktop computers. They were terminals. You're probably familiar with them. Tektronix made terminals. And a terminal company spun off from Tektronix, and I had stock in it for a while. Did real well. So anyway, we had these terminals. So us guys, we were so busy trying to get these parts molded and work with the engineers. And first thing in the morning, we had to spend an hour on learning these terminals. Well, on these terminals, it's not like a keyboard is today. In order to write a simple letter, you had to know a code. You're going to say to somebody. So you had to punch in XYZ 31, and then that was to. And then you had to remember something else for from. And you had to remember all, it was in the book, of course. There was a book here. It would take you, like an hour, you just email, it takes you 30 seconds. It would take somebody, unless you were very experienced, a half an hour to write an email. So this valuable time, a whole hour, we didn't have 5 minutes to waste. And the whole crew, the tooling, the guys that were drawing up the molds, a very sophisticated job, and I was trying to schedule things. And the guy, we had a main plant out at Wilsonville that we were working with engineers there, and they needed parts, and they'd call us up. Well, it's going to be a few days before we get it to you because we're behind, and we couldn't catch up. And then on top of that, they decided, we're going to have a quality control course in the afternoon. Well, everybody that was in our group, about 20 in the office type group that I was in, all had worked with quality control for years. We knew more than the teacher did. But they brought in a guy that started from grade 1. And so all of us guys that were designing tools, actually checking quality, working with the engineers, telling them how to design the parts so that we could make it. They can design parts so you can't mold them, can't get them out of the mold. And they're trying to teach us quality control with formulas and stuff. Another hour wasted a day.